Welcome to the Katie Halper Show. I'm very excited to be here with you guys tonight, and I'm so excited to be joined by Briahna Joy Gray. We have so much to talk about. We're also going to be joined during the second half of the show by Mark Lamont Hill. But before we start, I just want to remind everyone to please like this stream, give it a thumbs up. Also, please hit subscribe, and then press the bell. And if you can, please be a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. We had a great Patreon-only extended discussion with John Mearsheimer for last week. So I'm going to bring on Briahna Joy Gray. And as people probably know, Briahna Joy Gray is the host of the Bad Faith podcast. She was a press secretary for Bernie Sanders. She was also a politics editor at the Intercept. And she was recently fired by The Hill for the show Rising over her criticisms of Israel. And we're going to get into what exactly happened there. So without any further ado, welcome, Brie.
Thank you, Katie. I've been really looking forward to this since you are one of the few people in the world who can really commiserate with me from a personal place.
Right. It's true. So for people who don't know, I was fired by The Hill show Rising for a monologue that I wrote laying out why Israel was an apartheid state. And then later on, Brie, who had been there much longer than I had and was a full-time host, was also fired. We're actually going to take a look at the interview that you were fired over. So
ostensibly, remember, I think it is important to note that no one who works at The Hill has ever said a single word to me about my firing. During my day off, regularly scheduled day off, I simply received an email that, I posted on Twitter so everyone can read it. I didn't say anything about why I was fired. I called my producer several times that day just to get some clarification about when my last day really was before I posted to the internet. I texted her, I emailed, and to date have not heard a word from anybody who actually works at The Hill except for Robbie and my very kind makeup artist. So who knows actually what the actual reason was. Yeah, that's right.
Oh, nice, Diana. See, another thing more history that we share, having sat in the chair myself and had my makeup done by Diana. Hi, Diana, if you're watching. This is a good question from John. Tell us where we stand on the Broadly Speaking with Brie and Katie show. It would be like a superhero team up. It's true. One of the things we did at The Hill on Rising was we did a pilot for a show we want to do with you and me, Rania Kalik, and Abby Martin. And of course, that was not possible after they fired me. But now the world is our oyster, Briahna Joy Gray. So who knows what the future holds? But let's show a clip. And by the way, shout out to your producer for misspelling your name in the email you received.
Well, again, that wasn't from my producer. I'm not sure who that woman is. Maybe it seems like she's maybe in an HR capacity. Never interacted with that person before in my life. It was truly very impersonal. And I think it's relevant to note that because there's a sort of plausible deniability that The Hill gets to have around why they actually fired me by avoiding having any confrontation with, I don't mean confrontation, but any interaction with me at all. So the internet gets to decide why it was that I was fired versus, what I believe from not just that day, but my subjective experience of months and months of what it's been like working at The Hill, particularly after October 7th.
Briahna Joy Gray very bravely defended me after I was fired. We'll cut this in later, but you said that you had been told by the management at Rising that I was fired not over ideological reasons, but stylistic ones. And you said on the air, on your broadcast, on The Hill, on the Rising show, you said that if it's true that it's not for ideology, but it was just for stylistic reasons, well, I'm going to test that by talking about Israel. And you certainly were given ample opportunity with October 7th.
As many of you know, journalist Katie Halper was a guest host on Rising Monday before last. And as part of that role, she recorded a monologue. The radar addressed Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib's statement that progressives cannot ignore the apartheid conditions many Palestinians live under and be progressive except for Palestine. Katie's radar critiqued the backlash to Tlaib, incited a former Secretary of State, chair of Israel's left political party, Israel's former education minister, former Israeli environment minister, and others who corroborated this view that Israel is an apartheid state. The decision was subsequently made by The Hill editor-in-chief Bob Cusack not to air her radar. Katie was then told that not only would she not be asked back to host, but that she would no longer be invited to do the regular guest spots she has been participating in for about 3 years now. I strongly disagree with how Katie was treated by The Hill. It seems obvious to me from her long tenure on the show that neither the quality of her analysis nor her presentation style has ever been seriously in question up until this point. You can find her radar, which she re-recorded with Breakthrough News, an independent media channel, on their YouTube page and judge for yourself. I, for one, find it difficult to believe that despite The Hill's representations, this is merely an editorial decision as opposed to an ideological one. As a former senior politics editor at The Intercept myself, I found the quality and accuracy of Katie's radar to be unimpeachable. And I believe losing Katie's commentary is a real loss for The Hill. Over the past week, I have struggled with whether to continue co-hosting this show. Robbie and I talk about censorship and cancel culture frequently, and it feels hypocritical to talk about those subjects without applying the same scrutiny to our own show. However, I also believe strongly in this show's format. I deeply value cross-ideological discourse, and I think The Hill is one of the few corporate media spaces in which left voices are tolerated at all. The Hill has told me that the decision to end its relationship with Katie is an editorial decision about style and not ideology or substance, and that it would be happy for me to cover Israel-Palestine and any other newsworthy topic as I see fit. So I've decided to put that claim to the test. I will be staying with The Hill as long as I do not experience what I believe to be ideological censorship. I will continue to cover topics as I see fit, including the ongoing apartheid conditions in Israel. And if at any point I feel like I am being censored, I will end my relationship with The Hill.
And I think it's fair to say that they failed that test, but you guys can be the judge. So let's take a look at this clip from an interview you did with a hostage's sister.
The world won't help us. We will see 9/11 the second time in the US as well, but we can already see in the United States, in Michigan, rallies that calling death to America, not condemning terror organizations in Israel or any other place, in fact, is reflecting to your country as well.
I'm just going to push back against the implication that in Michigan, which has the largest Muslim and Arab population in America, that there is any threat of terrorism from our own people. And I would like to clarify also that one of the rationale that was presented for 9/11 was discussed with America's support of Israel's continued occupation of Palestine. So that's neither here nor there. I really do hope that Netanyahu agrees and Israel agrees to the ceasefire deal that could bring all the hostages, including your sister, home. And I'm sure many people watching are praying for her safety.
Thank you. Me too. And I really hope that you specifically will believe women when they say that they got hurt.
All right. Thanks for joining. Stick around. More Rising coming up next.
So, Brie, explain to us what the eye roll was for.
I had a conversation with my producer about how I expected this interview to go. I never said no to interviews. I think there's value in talking to everyone, including the family member of hostages. Katie, as you know, you've interviewed kind of a really compelling interview with the son, I believe, of two Israelis who were killed on October 7th. Mm-hmm. That was a really compelling and useful interview. And I certainly would have never in the history of the show and would never shy away from those kind of interviews. I will say that the same was not true about guests that I wanted to have on from the left's ideological perspective, but we'll get back to that later. But the way that this guest was described to me made it clear that she had put herself forward as an interview subject, which made me immediately skeptical, because the typical way that guests are booked on the show is that we reach out to guests that are interesting to us. That's the producer's function, to produce a show, not to necessarily take kind of volunteers from a crowd, especially given that we have had a long history on the show. This was the third instance of a pro-Zionist guest coming on specifically to try to litigate what they felt were my personal opinions about what I've tweeted or what I've expressed about the humanitarian offenses that are happening in Gaza, as opposed to the subject of the interview, which in this case, I tried very hard to keep it focused on the state of her sister and the other hostages, and either talking just kind of interpersonally about her sister, why she's loved and why she wants her home, or to the extent that the guest opened the door to it, what she thinks about Israel's prioritization or failure to prioritize getting hostages home, which is, of course, the subject of enormous protests that we saw just this past weekend. Unfortunately, what I anticipated would happen and what I warned my producer would happen and cautioned her against as she pushed this guest on me on was that she made it personal. And here's how I knew it was going to be personal. The way it was framed to me was, this guest wants to come on and talk to you. Now, Katie, as you know, this is a show that I co-host with Robbie. It wasn't framed as, this guest wants to come on Rising. This guest wants to tell her story on Rising. This guest wants to talk to you and Robbie on Rising. No, specifically, the producer slacked to me and said, this guest wants to come on and talk to you, which to me was a clear sign that she wanted to be personally confrontational with me, as opposed to keeping the focus on her own sister. And when she did that at the very end of the interview, I was exasperated, because I felt like my producer, Joanne Levine, had declined to protect me when this had happened in the past, with other pro-Zionist guests. They use it as an opportunity to clip it and do a social media pile-on, attacking me across socials, clogging up my feed, very much personalizing it, right, to advance their own kind of Hasbara agenda. And I would prefer not to be used as a tool in that way. The production team didn't seem to have, or I should say my producer specifically, Joanne Levine, didn't seem to have any interest in protecting me from that eventuality. There was never any commentary about the mountain of racist and sexist um, tweets and memes that were made about me after each of those other instances that this had happened. And frankly, it was a sort of a hostile environment that I was continually put in, because the show prioritized scapegoating me over protecting their own hosts. And when the predictable happened, I exasperatedly glanced for a fraction of a second off into the corner of the screen before ending the interview, before the guest could continue to personalize it.
In terms of the actual content of what she was saying, right? There's also that aspect of it, which is perhaps I roll justifiable. Uh, the idea that you don't believe women. I mean, you've done excellent radars on the weaponization of a narrative of sexual violence that's been used to, I would say, and you've said this, justify the genocide in Gaza, right? We all
That's
know
right.
the history of atrocity propaganda. Saddam Hussein pulling babies out of incubators was one lie that was perpetuated. Uh, Gaddafi giving Viagra to his troops was another one. So, what do you have to say about the actual content of what she was saying, which is that you somehow don't believe women?
Well, earlier in the interview, and I really do encourage people to watch the whole interview because it was long. We let it go longer than usual because I think it is important to hear from someone like her. And the irony of kind of turning into a cry bully scenario after there was a lot of grace demonstrated in the context of that interview, I think is particularly disappointing. But at one point in the interview, she brought up not just the mass rape hoax, but specifically the ultra religious group Zaka that was at the root of many of the core stories, narratives that were later debunked about sexual violence on October 7th. Narratives that have been debunked roundly by both the American and the Israeli press. And so when she specifically said, haven't you heard of Zaka? I was forced to push back at that point as well and saying, yes, I have heard of Zaka. And you might not be aware of this, but those reports have been roundly discredited and they are, in fact, not true. This is not an issue of believing women. There has yet to be a single woman that has materialized from October 7th who is making a claim about sexual assault. And in fact, as we now know from innumerable reports, including the latest UN investigation, hundreds and thousands of pieces of documentary evidence, visual evidence, photographs, and videos have been reviewed now in an investigatory capacity by the UN. And none of that imagery shows sexual assaults happening on October 7th. Now, there have been reports about a hostage describing sexual assault as a hostage, and I have no issue with that. I don't doubt the credibility of that at all, and her claim should be heard. But this woman, this guest, was making specific claims that had already been factually, roundly debunked by people across the ideological spectrum. And that is what she meant by believe women, believe roundly debunked lies. And I don't think it's my role as a journalist and the host of a show to let that kind of misinformation, for lack of a better word, stand unchallenged.
I asked you about this particular exchange, but this is something we hear from many defenders of Israel, believe women. And if you just point to the fact that there actually isn't forensic evidence of the allegedly systematic weaponization of rape, you're accused of being a rape denier. If you saw this live, you were so in luck because you got to see that whole stream with me and Briahna Joy Gray and Mark Lamont Hill. And if you are watching this later and you want to see the full chat with Briahna Joy Gray and me, you can do that at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. And I really recommend you do that because we talk about some behind the scenes things that are very entertaining and also talk about some idiots who are very rude to Brie. And I think we have the last laugh. So again, you can do that at patreon.com/The Katie